Hey guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly gimme radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. Like we promised in the Van Halen 1 episode, Jay and I are getting together to do Fair Warning, which is a bit of a sleeper for Van Halen, but is nonetheless, I think, should be considered one of their classic records, even though it didn't maybe at first hit the financial records that the first record did.
Yeah, completely agreed. This has long been one of my favorites. I mean, for me, it's always been the first record, which we already covered, Fair Warning and 1984. Those are the ones for me. You know, I like certain songs on the other records, but to me, the Fair Warning, 1984, and the first one, Van Halen 1. You know, that's the triumvirate right there.
Yeah, 1984 is awesome too, and that was like their kind of swan song with Dave, Diamond Dave. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least for a while.
I was thinking about that Van Halen singles box set I was mentioning to you earlier. It kind of puts it in perspective because it's just the Diamond Dave era. So, and the singles release, so it covers 78 to 84. So, Diamond Dave left the band in 85. So we're talking about obviously Van Halen existed before they put out the first record, but as far as like public, nationwide or global impact, 6 years, 78 to 84. Crazy.
It's pretty mind-boggling if you think about it.
Yeah. It was just 6 years they did all that.
Also I think that as I'm diving into these older records, I feel like the turnover between recording, the number of days that records are recorded in and getting the record out to the people is like this really compressed time frame as opposed to what ended up happening later on, like in the industry, so to speak.
Totally.
So some of the particulars about this record is it's a fourth studio album. Came out on April 29th, 1981. Recorded March through April 1981. Released on Warner Brothers. Recorded at Sunset Sound once again in LA. Okay. Produced by Ted Templeman. And we mentioned the last time he produced Montrose, which is Sammy Hagar's former band. And, Sammy was destined at some point to be in Van Halen as the lead vocalist after they departed with Dave. And the engineer was Don Landy. And we can get into, once we get into the actual production, Landy was like Eddie Van Halen's ally in this production effort, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost say like, I don't know, what's the word? He was like, he was like doing his dirty work in a lot of ways,
Yeah. And it was recorded in 12 days for approximately $40,000, which is fucking unbelievable if you think about it.
Yeah. It really is. Because a lot more was spent on records in those days, and I feel like I think it's kind of impressive for a band to record. You don't hear of many, not bigger bands, doing stuff in 12 days now. I mean, I personally subscribe to the Steve Albini school, is that if you can't do it in a week, you shouldn't be doing it. But 12 days for Van Halen, that's pretty amazing,
Yeah, I mean, I had Steve Brodsky on the show. He was one of the first 10 episodes, and Cave In on their major label debut, they were in the studio for like months apparently. And,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, just I don't know what you'd be doing in there, but his stories of their recording process were pretty epic. And then Van Halen's Fair Warning record was recorded in 12 days. It's pretty fucking crazy,
Yeah.
And so the program length is 31 minutes and 11 seconds, and we're in that late 70s, early 80s vinyl 33 and a third format for this record. You know, it was before the digital age, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's I mean, and I think, what is it like? I mean, if like 44 minutes, they say you can get on a one record at 33 and a third before it starts like sounding like crap, before you start losing quality.
Yeah.
So I mean, even 31, they're like, well under the threshold there.
But the quality of this material, though, it's like I don't feel like there's no filler on this record either, which is awesome. And I think that might be like one of the upsides to knowing that you only have a certain amount of time to do your thing. You know, that a lot of these older records, there were no fillers. You know, everything was like lean and mean because you only had like 40 minutes of time to get it happening. You know.
No, that's a great point, man. And I always, one of the things I think about a lot is, when the CD kicked in and it became like you could fit like whatever it was, 70 or 80 minutes of music, bands felt that they had to fill it up. And so you end up with these records that are like 15, 16 songs and half of it's garbage, So it just proves that this was, the original way it was set up, the original format, this sort of like, keeping it short and sweet, just a way to go,
Yeah. This record featured the classic lineup with Ed Van Halen on guitar and synths. This was the part of the introduction of using synthesizers was on this record.
Yeah.
Alex Van Halen on drums, Michael Anthony on bass and backing vocals, the voice of an angel, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and even if you won't.
And of course, Diamond, David Lee Roth, vocals.
Yeah. Yeah. Consummate showman.
Yeah, and I always felt like, it's funny that David Lee Roth back then, like, in the 90s, I felt like being a front man wasn't as important. You know what I mean? And in some ways, I feel like Dave was the last great showman of rock and roll in some ways. You think about like he had, Elvis and Little Richard, you had Robert Plant, David Bowie, larger than life, like personalities.
Yeah.
And Dave, you had Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, all these guys, Ozzy.
Yeah.
But I feel like Dave was like the last of the great front man in some ways, because in the 80s, you had some, in my humble opinion, you had these like pale copies of like what David Lee Roth was doing. And, I'm not the biggest fan of like the LA metal scene. There's some bands I like LA Guns, like Guns N' Roses, that kind of stuff, Wasp, but a lot of what was going on, I think in the 80s, Dave might have been like a huge template for what was going on, but nobody was doing these like, we talked about his kicks and spins and backflips and sword play and all this stuff on stage like he was doing,
No, man, he really was one of a kind with that too, because I even feel like when you look at the Sunset Strip bands, even everyone from even Axl, like Axl Rose, Cinderella, Poison, even the Motley Crues, like all these guys, to me, I think Steven Tyler was the template for those guys. Especially with all the scarves and all this shit, like they clearly stole so much from Steven Tyler. No one even attempted the shit that Davin Dave was doing. You know what I mean? It's like I was saying I was saying in our episode on Van Halen 1. It's like, I think a lot of those guys in the same bands, they definitely wanted to be the guitar players. They wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. You know what I mean? And they tried their damnedest, but no one even attempted the Diamond Dave thing. They're like, I can't fuck with that, which is kind of how I felt. You know what I mean? Even though, like I said, I'm never going to get to Eddie Van Halen's level of ability. But to me, I look at what Diamond Dave goes, and I just go, I'm not even going to try that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, definitely Steven Tyler on Guns N' Roses, man, with the scarves and like the blues kind of thing, But I feel like the second or third tier bands, like that dude in like Warrant, like these kind of like blonde, like sexy guys, You
Right,
know, like
right.
were the ones that were trying to do the David Lee Roth thing, but didn't
Yeah,
have like the athleticism to do backflips and like taekwondo kicks through the air,
right,
you know.
right. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so the track listing on this is, well, first of all, before we get to that, let's talk about the overall tone on this record, because
Mm,
this is like kind of a one of a kind record for them. And I feel like
yeah,
every band has that one record that is a bit of an anomaly to the rest of their catalog. And this record is Van Halen's anomaly in some ways, because the album cover,
yeah,
it was a part of a bigger piece called The Maze by a Canadian artist named William Kurelek.
yeah.
And it just shows like a bunch of just like dark shit happening. And apparently Kurelek was a patient in a mental hospital when he'd worked on this thing.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they found this and were like, oh, let's make this one section of this painting our album cover, kind of, I think, is an indication that there was a bit of conflict going on at this point in the band's career. And there's, based on the stories and some of the research that both of you and I have done, there was definitely dissension among the ranks. And I think that conflict is what drove the darkness of this record.
Yeah, it seems like that. And from what I can gather, the choice for the album cover was Al's choice, and that he was the impression I got was that he was kind of the guy behind most of the album covers as far as choosing the artwork. What I could not find out is where he saw the painting, and like because I found out that it's still the original. It still hangs in, and I don't know if it was there at the time when this album came out in '81. Um, it hangs in Bethlehem Royal Hospital in England, which is colloquially known as Bedlam, and which where that term comes from. And there was a book that came out maybe 20 years ago about a patient at Bedlam. William Minor was his name, who was the greatest contributor to the Oxford English Dictionary. And he was in Bedlam, and he was a surgeon, and he'd committed a murder. He kind of had a psychotic episode and shot a random stranger in the street. He ended up in Bedlam, and that's where the painting is today. And interestingly, I did a deep dive on this painting because I just found it fascinating. There's a sequel piece. Kurelek painted another piece. So as you mentioned, he was in the mental hospital in London in 1953 when he painted this. Years later, when he got out, he painted a sequel piece. Now, the original painting is called The Maze, and he painted a sequel piece which is called Out of the Maze years later. And this painting it's a family, and they're having a picnic in this idyllic countryside scene. But so now the original painting is actually the interior of a skull, and it's meant to be the interior of Kurelek's skull. And you see different scenes happening in different parts of the skull. One of those, or a couple of those scenes, were pulled out for the Van Halen cover. In Out of the Maze, the sequel piece, the skull is very small, and it's in the bottom left-hand corner of this field where this family is having the picnic. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a storm coming in on this nice sunny day, and that apparently represented a premonition that Kurelek had about nuclear holocaust.
Wow.
Yeah. So and then some other things, just some quick other facts. So Kurelek died in 1977 at age 50, so 4 years before Fair Warning came out. There's claims, now I can't imagine this can possibly be true, but I found various sources that claim that the piece of this painting, The Maze, was used without permission for Fair Warning.
I can't. That hard to believe,
yeah, I find that hard to believe too. But it was in multiple things, so I don't know. But anyway, there you have it. There's the background. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the nuclear war thing is interesting because if you remember in the '80s, the specter of nuclear annihilation was like hanging heavy over the world in general. Because the Cold War and nuclear holocausts were, kind of like a big thing in the 80s. I felt like, there's all these movies like Threads and,
Yeah.
which way the wind blows.
Yeah.
You ever see that?
Yeah.
It's like a cartoon about.
I didn't see that one. I just remember stuff like Red Dawn and of course you had bands like Nuclear Assault and I feel like every other album cover was like a mushroom cloud in the 80s, of like the hard and heavy bands,
Yeah, Age of Quarrel had the Chromax.
Yeah, bingo. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That was about as literal as you can get with nuclear annihilation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things, though, like we touched on it earlier, was the deep conflicts that were going on. They were starting to form. They were starting to take shape at the time of the creation of this record.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, was between Eddie and Dave.
Yeah.
And
it seems that way.
And David Lee Roth, along with Templeman, they had this concept of keeping the band's commercial appeal intact. And Eddie Van Halen wanted to explore more of a creative bent with the band. And, he's a prodigy, he's a groundbreaking, visionary musician. And Dave's an entertainer. And so it would make sense that Dave wants to do the showbiz, swinging from the chandeliers and stuff like that. And Eddie Van Halen wanted to go deeper into his own creative energies and get more introspective and everything. So there was that initial, and for what I read too is that there was also tension when between Dave and Eddie when Eddie married Valerie Bertinelli, because she was a TV star at the time. I don't know. I don't even know if anyone remembers who she is these days, but back in the 80s, she was, kind of like a hot Hollywood TV, star, basically a starlet,
Yeah.
And I think Dave coveted that. He wanted to be the first guy in the band to have like a movie star or a celebrity girlfriend or wife or something like that.
One day at a time. That was, I remember when that show was on. Yeah, and that was a big thing. I remember I was like that, and that's how I kind of. So when you're a little kid, you you always have this weird. I always thought of her as like this woman who's married to Eddie Van Halen. That was kind of her thing, Yeah, it's funny, man. But yeah, and so there's like a story about what's the story like? Eddie Van Halen overhears David Lee Roth saying that fucking little prick, not only is he winning all the guitar awards, but he's also the first to marry a movie star. So that kind of sets the tone, I guess, a little bit for what's going on here. The conflict that's developing now between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth.
And also apparently through an interview that's on ultimateclassicrock.com, there was a bit of a Yoko Ono thing going on with Valerie Bertinelli too. Maybe not to the same extent that Yoko Ono did, but she was critical. She's a little critical, adding her input into what the band was doing, which I tend to not agree with that kind of thing. You know what I mean? I think the creative process should be an insular thing, and really there shouldn't be any outside forces, like unless it's a. Unless that opinion is solicited, I don't think anyone should be involved in that.
Yeah, was Eddie giving her notes on her, award-winning performances in One Day at a Time?
Yeah. So there was this thing going on in the studio where they would work during the day, they'd track all this stuff, and then at night, Eddie enlisted the aid of the engineer Don Landy. And they would go into the studio after hours at 4 a.m. and he would redo a lot of the solos and some of the parts and stuff on the records. And Michael Anthony actually confirmed that. I think it was on this. Oh, actually, this was in the studio with Redbeard, an interview where Michael Anthony was quoted as saying Eddie and Landy would pull all-nighters, confirmed that there was a lot of tension with Roth. So there you go.
Yeah. And then eventually, it's interesting because after that, Don Landy helped Eddie Van Halen build Eddie's home studio. And, that whole situation of kind of like letting, Don Landy letting Eddie Van Halen back into the studio after hours is very reminiscent of, there's tons of these stories, over the, annals of rock history here. But one of the most famous ones, I'm sure you've heard, is the mixing of the Black Sabbath Live Evil album, which kind of marked the end of the first Dio era with Black Sabbath, where it was the same thing. Tony Iommi would have the engineer let him in to remix, bring the guitars up. Iommi would split, Dio would show up and tell him to bring the vocals up, and they went back and forth like that for like months, and that kind of was the end, was the beginning of the end for or it was the end of the end, really, because that was the last thing they did. But yeah, that's what that reminded me of when I read that about Fair Warning.
There's even like microcosmic stories like that go on, and I'm not going to mention anyone's names, but there's people out there that I know some of these people, but I'm not going to mention any names, where there's been sessions for certain records where there would be two guitar players in the band, and there'd be two guitar players tracking the songs, but the other guy would go back and re-record the other guy's guitar parts, and
wow.
Without even telling the other guy he was doing that. And then years later, this dude would find out about these things. So ego's a terrible thing, man.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Wow.
Not to quote Charlie Manson,
Yeah, I would like to hear who you're talking about off the record later.
There's another story too that I'll tell you that one later, but no one needs to really know who I'm talking about right now.
Right.
So we'll let the innocent remain innocent, the guilty remain guilty, and no one needs to know any different. So
fair enough.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just run through the tracks and
yeah.
So the song starts. Let me. I want to take that out there. The record starts off with a bang, with the song "Mean Streets," and pretty much sets the tone for the rest of the album.
Yeah, that song is a monster. So apparently, this is what I dug up on this song. So apparently, "Mean Streets" has riffs from two old Van Halen songs that they did. They were originals that existed before the first album, I think, that kind of never made it onto a record. So, and Eddie Van Halen did this consistently over. Apparently, Fair Warning was the last time he did this, where he would go back and kind of cannibalize riffs from old material and bring them in. So, Mean Streets, I guess, was the kind of last case of this happening. Where he stole riffs from two old Van Halen songs. One was apparently called Voodoo Queen. The other one was called She's the Woman. And that beginning sound you hear of him kind of slapping the strings against the neck is a slap bass technique adapted from funk, this is the early 80s. So this is kind of the height of, this is Rick James is huge at this point. Prince is just coming up. So that kind of music is very prominent, in other spheres, I guess. And also, just an interesting note, they start. Mean Streets is the longest song on the record, and they start off with that, which is not something you see often.
Yeah, no, it's like this track would probably be like track 3 or something like that on a record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'd be like the second or third track. The first one would be like this kind of like, kind of more of like an intro, then the meat song will be like track 3 or something like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Dirty Movies.
A great tune. Yeah.
Dirty Movies is next, and this is actually one of my favorite songs on the record.
Me too. Absolutely. Yeah. So cool and so different from Van Halen.
There's just like, aside from the title and the lyrics, the tempo of the song and that kind of throbbing bass, it's just a sleazy sounding song in addition to the sleaze factor of the lyrics too, you know?
Totally. And you know what I meant to look up? I'm going to look it up right now.
Why it's in quotation marks?
Well, no, I never could figure that out. Why? But the theme, okay, so, interesting. Okay, so if you remember, and it was around this time, it was so around this time that it was the same year, and it was just a few months later, September of 81, actually in my birthday in 1981, Jay Giles comes out with Angel in the Centerfold, or Centerfold is the song, which is the same theme as Dirty Movies, which is the girl that you went to high school with ends up in a porno. Same year. Interesting.
Has that ever happened to you, that you knew a girl like from your high school class ended up doing pornographic movies? Anything like that ever happened to you in your life?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I don't. What, have this happened to you?
Yes.
Really?
Yep. There are these two sisters that I grew up with, both beautiful. And the one that was older, she was 2 years older than me, and her younger sister was a year younger than me. And I got to be really good friends with her younger sister. And beautiful women, beautiful. Like, and they were cool. They were really nice. But you can tell the older one had that, kind of self-destructive, like, you know what I mean? Like vibe. You knew that, like, she could have been like this really popular girl in high school, but she had that like thing that like kept her on the outskirts, on the outside. And, she would associate with people that were, a little bit more on the fringes of society. And I remember a friend of mine, she lived like walking distance from where I lived with my parents. And I remember a friend of mine, we spied on her one day. We watched her get undressed in front of her bedroom window. Yeah, it's so that's a little aside. But it turned out that a few years later, she was in an adult film. I don't know if she made more, nor did I actually try to find this film because, I don't know. It would have bummed me out a little bit, I think, to see something like that.
I'm wondering now if, given what we were talking about earlier, how quickly things happened, like they recorded this, this album they were still recording it, or at least mixing it or something in early April, and it came out at the end of April.
Yeah, exactly.
So Centerfold, Jay Giles' Centerfold comes out September 13th, 1981. So whatever that is, 7 months later. It is entirely possible, that Jay Giles heard Dirty Movies. Jay Giles' band heard Dirty Movies. Peter Wolf, I guess that was the singer.
Yeah.
And said, "Oh yeah, that, like, I had that experience. I'm gonna write a song about that too." And obviously, they're two very different songs, but it's just a theme. It's interesting that two songs with that same theme came out like 6 months apart from each other. I don't know. It's interesting.
But the 80s in general, there was a lot of like jailbait songs and creepy,
totally.
like
Totally.
predator, sexual predator songs. Absolutely,
but that's throughout the 70s. But this is very specific. This is like a girl I went to high school with ends up, and I think in obviously in Centerfold it's a magazine, and in Dirty Movies it's a movie. But it's just interesting that it's like that specific sleazy theme. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I have to admit that I actually I like some of Jay Giles' material, especially the stuff in the 70s. I think is pretty good.
Peter Wolf stepped on my foot once at a gig. So you remember Kevin Shirtliff from Scissor Fight?
Yeah, okay.
So he used to play in a band at a little bar in Porter Square, just like a pickup band where they would do like old, like early rock and roll and blues songs. And they had this guy, this older black guy was the singer. He was like in his 60s at the time, and this is probably 20 years ago at this point. Who was great. He was a great singer, and they would do like 10-inch record and stuff like that. And Peter Wolf, I think, lived in the neighborhood, and one night I happened to be there, just hanging out with Kevin, and Peter Wolf got up on stage with him and did a couple songs.
Damn.
And I was at the bar when he was like kind of coming off stage, and the guy stepped on my foot.
Did you say, "Excuse me"?
Yeah. No, he was fine, but I was like, oh, so it's like, it's not. It was not the. I guess it was not the. Your everyday. The place is really. I wish I could remember the name of it. The bar was really small, so it was crowded. So it was not an unusual experience to have your foot stepped on.
Yeah.
But yeah, Peter Wolf was the guy who did it to me. So there you go.
Yeah, Porter Square at that time when I was living in Boston was a little bit out of my jurisdiction up there.
Yeah.
I didn't really make it up there too much.
And I want to mention that another thing I dug up was that apparently in Dirty Movies, in these slide guitar parts, Eddie Van Halen allegedly sawed off a piece of his guitar so he could reach the high notes for the slide guitar parts in Dirty Movies, which is I find that fascinating.
Hey man, I mean, why not? He's a fucking innovator, I'm sure I could see him being like, how can I hit these notes? I know. I'll get this Sawzall and I'll cut this piece of the guitar out and make it easier for myself.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Then we come up on Sinner's Swing, where David Lee Roth uses profanity in the song. He says,
and
she looks so fucking good.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I didn't, had he done that before or since in a Van Halen song, or is this the only instance? I don't know.
That's an interesting question that I don't know the answer to, because I want to say that since Dave, being the guy who is very much aware of commercial success, would probably refrain from using profanity in any of the songs. And that point, the point of bringing this up is I wonder what Dave's mindset was when he was writing this song. Was he just like, I'm succumbing to Ed's creative, impulses here, so fuck it. I'm just going to no one's going to listen to this record, so the hell with it. I wonder if that was his mindset at the time.
Well, okay, that could be one. The other thing is this is pre-PMRC, right? So because that was 85.
Right.
So, no, he didn't have to, Tipper Gore was not like kind of staring everyone down yet at this point. And it's possible, depending what order the songs are written on or what they were thinking of at the time. I mean, to me, if they're recording Sinner's Swing and they've already got Mean Streets and Unchained, and so this is Love in the Can, maybe they're thinking this isn't going to be a single anyways. We can do whatever we want.
That's maybe, but Dave, in my impression of David Lee Roth is that how like Michael Jackson Thriller, like every song is a fucking hit,
Right.
I think Dave would probably be of the mindset that I want to make an album like a Michael Jackson record, but a hard rock record where every record is a fucking hit. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know.
Right.
I just it's an interesting thing because it's I felt like it was a little bit out of character,
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. And in fact, it was only when we talked last time and we decided we were going to do this program specifically about Fair Warning that I kind of went back and really listened to like Fair Warning, like with like a special ear, like for detail and everything. And I think it was like the first time I really noticed, not that he swear. I mean, I was aware that he said that, but it was the first time where I really thought, wow, has he done that before? Did he like, I think that was, I feel like, I mean, maybe someone out there listening to this, knows more, I'm sure. I mean, all you have to do is go back and listen to all the material, but I feel like this might be the only instance.
I'm going to say you're probably right about that,
Yeah.
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 But it's, cool song. Like I said, in my book, this whole record is hits, but not everyone sees things the way I do,
Right. Yeah.
However, Hear About It Later, the track that closes side one, is another one of my favorite songs on this record. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that song's the lyrics in it are great, and it's just like a cool song.
Yeah, no, I think that the impression that I get is that like real Van Halen heads, like the people who bothered to dive deeper than the singles or whatever, that is a fan favorite, that particular song. That and Dirty Movies, but for what it's worth, the Dirty Movies is another one. With those are the kind of like, if you're into Van Halen, you dig those tunes,
Also, like around the time that I was, for me as a young kid in the '80s, Van Halen was the kind of band that it was like a dirty kid band. You know what I mean? It was like,
yeah.
they were huge, but it was like people who like smoked cigarettes and like did drugs and like drank beers and drove like IROC Z's and shit like that. Well, from where I'm from, those are the people that drove IROC Z's and like worked on cars and shit. Were into this kind of stuff,
Yeah, yeah. We had the same thing.
Yeah, and they weren't they became like more of like I think later after 1984, it just kind of like a more of a household name, I guess. They were dangerous, is what I'm trying to say, in 1981 still.
Yeah, totally.
Now, side two starts off with Unchained, which is
a banger,
a real banger.
Yeah.
You want to take away some insights on this one here, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, well, first let me just say on a personal level, this is one of my favorite Van Halen songs of all their songs, of all the records. This is up there in the top 2 or 3 at least. Yeah, it's amazing. I love this song. So the working title was "Hit the Ground Running," which obviously that's a lyric in the song, so that's not really massive insight, I guess. But so the interesting thing that I dug up, which I didn't know, is the song features a guitar pedal called the MXR M117 flanger. And apparently when it became public knowledge that this was the pedal that Eddie Van Halen used on Unchained, sales went through the roof of this particular pedal. So they have the company has Eddie Van Halen to thank for their salesmanship. I'm sure he got plenty of free pedals out of the deal. And then, so of course, this song has the famous bit in the break where Dave is going off on his thing like, "Hey man, that suit is you. You'll get some leg tonight for sure." That whole like awesomely goofy bit. And then you hear someone saying, "Come on, Dave, give me a break." So that's Ted Templeman, the producer, using like the talk back button there on the console. And now, while this seems like probably to everyone listening, this seems like some weird ad lib thing that they sort of like decided to include, it turns out that's not the case at all. That whole back and forth was meticulously rehearsed. And apparently there are pre-production demos out there where it's actually Roth himself delivering the "Give Me a Break" line. So that was all written and rehearsed, which is maybe a little disappointing for everyone out there, but nonetheless, there you have it.
Yeah, I remember listening to that song for the first time because that's Unchained is one of my favorites. I love the guitar intro, just like it literally sounds like he's just standing in a kitchen, like playing the guitar riff. You know what I mean? And they just threw a couple mics up on him. But when I was a kid and I heard that breakdown, I was like, "Oh man, these guys are fucking crazy, man! They're fucking going nuts in the studio. This is great," But then, like, a few years later, as I myself started getting into like being in a band and recording and being in studios, I realized that, the way that song broke down seemed very, it's like a breakdown in the song. You know what I mean? And then, when the talk back, that isn't routed to the tape. You know what I mean? It's like at the very, like the only way the talk back would ever end up in the recording is if it was screaming through the headphones and
Right.
coming in through the vocal mic. That's literally the only physical way
Right.
the talkback channel would ever end up in a recording. So that's what made me, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a gag those guys pulled. But still,
Yeah.
still pretty awesome though, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
They kind of slow it down a little bit here, you know, get it a little sexy with push comes to shove, you know, a little soulful kind of vibe on this song.
Yeah, now see, this is an interesting one because what I dug up on this is that, so Eddie Van Halen is saying that this song, and you can hear it, that this song was inspired by David Lee Roth's love for dub-style reggae, which is interesting when you, the context of this record, because now is that Eddie Van Halen's way of like blaming? Does Eddie Van Halen not like this song and he's blaming it on Dave? Or is he just, I mean, is he just giving credit where credit is due? But it's just interesting that like, Eddie Van Halen seems to be implying that he's going along with David Lee Roth's vision for the song, but it's hard to know whether he means that in a positive way or a negative way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. And just judging on the stories that I've read about the recording of this record and the state of the band and the creative rifts that were going on, that might have been the case, that he's like apologizing for it. Well, you know, we let Dave have his way on this one song, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So this is love? Question mark.
Yeah. Question mark. Yeah. You know, I have to say, I was this song, I think, as far as Van Halen originals go, this is probably it was a single. This song was actually the first single, I think, from the record. And I don't know, man. This song is not they've released covers like Pretty Woman and stuff as singles that we've already talked about that. I don't like when Van Halen do covers. But I got to say, for their originals, this is probably one of my least favorite singles of theirs. As far as Van Halen originals goes, there's something about this song that doesn't, I don't know. I know it was a hit and people love it, and I'm not trying to talk shit or anything, but it's just this one's not my bag. How do you feel about it?
It's definitely my least favorite on the record. Even though it does have this like real sketchy vibe surrounding it, you know?
Yeah.
But I understand why they would pick this as a single though. Cause I mean, if you look at the album as a whole, you know, like, all right, the guy from the record label, their management, they're like, all right, we need to like, you know, these guys are massive. They're huge. They're larger than life. They're playing arenas. They're bigger than, you know, Kiss and doing all this stuff. And we need something to put on the radio. We need to expand their fan base. And let's see what we got to work here. We got Unchained. We got a song where David Lee Roth swears. We got a song about a fucking girl from high school who ends up in dirty movies. What do we got to work with here? Oh, we have this track, So This Is Love. Okay. It's got a sing-along sort of chorus. You know, there's like, you know, it's something we can work with. There's a hook. So we'll pick this as the single. So it makes sense to me, even though it isn't that great of a song, in my opinion.
I gotta say, I'm blown away that this song. I mean, I get it because it's got more of a feel good vibe than some of the other records. But why was Mean Street not a single? I don't get that. Mean Street was not technically a single, which blows my mind.
I mean, in a world, if there was a world of Jay Bennett's and Mike Hills out there, Mean Streets would have been the number one song on like you know, whatever chart you pick, you know, but that's not the case, you know. And that song might have had too much too much tooth and claw for a lot of people, maybe, you know.
Yeah, I can see that, but it's interesting that the band thought enough of it to put it like first on the record. Like, we're gonna kick off the record with this, even though it's the longest song. And then I don't know, it's weird. I mean, I realized that, like, obviously your record companies have more control over, you know, especially in this era, like what the singles are going to be and all that stuff. But I just think on a pure catchiness level, Mean Streets is a much stronger song than So This Is Love. But I think you're right though about just kind of like it's a little maybe Mean Streets is a little too down and dirty. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely not Dirty Movies. Like that couldn't never be a single in the world.
Yeah, no. Of course, yeah. Sinner's Swing obviously off the table, and Dirty Movies is off the table. But Yeah, I mean that's the
Unchained's got that crazy breakdown in it. That's not really,
yeah. Well, that was the second single. Unchained was the second single. It
right.
looks like, yeah.
But it wouldn't be the
Yeah.
lead though. It wouldn't be the song that we're like, all
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
this is our new
yeah.
record. Check this out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now the next song is a departure and also a harbinger of what was to come later on in Van Halen's career. It's Sunday Afternoon in the Park, which features Eddie Van Halen playing electro-harmonic synth.
Yeah, which was like a pretty. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like one of those synth nerds who knows when everything came out, but I think that was pretty cutting edge at the time, fairly cutting edge. To me, what I love about Sunday Afternoon in the Park is it reminds me of like John Carpenter, Halloween, like that kind of vibe.
Yeah, totally. I can see that. Yep.
And then to me, I've always considered that song almost as the intro to One Foot Out the Door, because then the synth continues into One Foot Out the Door. I've always kind of considered that as kind of one. I've always heard it as one piece, I guess you could say. Obviously, yeah. I mean, there's they used. I can't think of Diver Down because I don't like that record. But then they jumping ahead to 1984. Obviously, the synth is all over the place, and then obviously the whole Van Hagar era is tons of synth.
Yeah, it became very prominent in their instrumentation. The synth.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest with you, I like this song a lot because it sounds like real sinister, and
totally,
it does have that Carpenter-esque like vibe to it, but I kind of prefer when Eddie Van Halen stays away from the synths, and I like synths. Yeah. I mean, I like, at the time I really enjoyed Yes and King Crimson and bands like that, Deep Purple that used the synth really well. But I think Dave, I think Eddie should have stuck with just shredding on the guitar, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I do like this piece a lot, but I mean, again, when you kind of skip ahead to like even Jump, which is a good song, but it's obviously super synth driven. And then obviously the stuff they did with Hagar, it kind of becomes the synth at some point. Like, I can't even think of, by the time Sammy Hagar's in the band, it seems like the emphasis is almost more on the synth. You don't hear about anyone being like, oh, I'm going to learn the Eddie Van Halen guitar parts from the Hagar albums. Like, You know what I mean? It's always this era before the synth took over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, man. And by the time Hagar joined the band, they were in some ways past their prime as like a cutting edge, like hard rock bands. Like they were into the world of just massive, pop music in a lot of ways,
And which is crazy to me because, again, going back to like the sort of the tension that was apparently happening during this record where, Roth wanted to keep it commercial, Eddie Van Halen didn't. Roth leaves the band, and they end up doing the exact thing that Eddie Van Halen allegedly didn't want. It's weird.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. But the song, the record ends with One Foot Out the Door, which that's, again, one of my favorite songs on the record. Maybe one of my favorite Van Halen songs of all time.
Yeah, it's pretty. It is probably the only example that, at least that I can think of, where you like I said, the synth leaks into it. You can hear the synth underneath One Foot Out the kind of leaking in from Sunday Afternoon in the Park, and yet it's still a very straight ahead, like Van Halen, like guitar driven song that just happens to have a synth underneath it. You know what I'm saying? Whereas obviously later the guitar took the back seat and the synth, was up front. So it's kind of it would be interesting to have heard more stuff like this where they stay guitar oriented with just a little more like synth accents, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that synth, it makes the song like super heavy, in my opinion. I mean, I remember like around the time I heard this song, I mean, I've always been a huge Deep Purple fan, and the Machine Head record has that song Space Truckin' on it.
Yeah.
And I felt like the same role that the synth played on that song, I feel like the synth plays on One Foot Out the Door, even though like that's a way, the Van Halen song is like way more like up tempo, like faster and a little bit more
Yeah.
aggressive. And the Purple
Yeah.
song is like more of a groove to it, but it just adds this like sinister like layer to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that, should we mention, just a quick note that I found on that one is that allegedly that was done live in one take. So take that for what you will.
I can imagine like parts of that being live, like maybe the guitar tracks, because that guitar solo, that fade, that makes the song for me. That the last guitar thing that's going on, like he just like fucking shredding and like,
Yeah.
and I feel like that level of freedom probably was live, of him just like going buck wild on the guitar and like.
Yeah.
I wonder how long the song went on for in reality, because the song's a fade out, and like I wonder if it goes on for like another 2 minutes of just Eddie Van Halen like tearing it up on the guitar.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah.
Getting
Don't know
crazy,
how to end the song. Yeah.
But yeah, that's like one of my favorite records, man. It's fucking amazing.
Yeah, fantastic record.
So the singles were just so this is Love and Unchained, and that was it. That's all they were able to put out there, And,
yeah, I mean, it's I still can't I can't get my head around Mean Street not being a single, but that's the way it goes. Like you can't, it's crazy because I mean, I feel like you still hear Mean Street on the radio, and I seem to remember hearing it at the time, or maybe not at the time, but at least let's see, this record would have come out when I was 5. I probably wasn't cognizant of what I was listening to until I was about 7. And I remember definitely listening to and enjoying Van Halen at 7 years old. And I feel like I would have heard Mean Street on the radio at that time, but by then the album would have been out for a couple of years. So maybe DJs were just kind of pulling tracks off or whatever. So in my mind, I was actually surprised to learn that Mean Street was not a single. But there you have it,
Yeah. Yeah. It's, that they maybe they decided like, well, we can't really work with anything else on this record. Let's just let's move on. Just a quick question. And have you seen that Beastie Boys documentary?
No, I've heard it's good though.
All right. Well, the reason, you're going to wonder why I'm talking about the Beastie Boys, but I felt like Paul's Boutique is like the Mean Streets for Beast, or the Fair Warning out of the Beastie Boys catalog.
That's interesting that you say that, because I don't listen to a lot of Beastie Boys, but Paul's Boutique is, I would say, the only Beastie Boys record that I could point to and say that I like.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good record. I think it's their best one, but that one is the one that no one ever, it came out and no one liked it at all. No one paid attention to it. And, even to this day, people kind of talk shit about that record, and they talked about it in that documentary. It's not really a documentary. I just got a new Apple TV. And so along with that, I got a free year of Apple Plus.
Okay.
So I'm checking it out, and that's on, I guess it's exclusive on Apple Plus.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so I watched it yesterday, and it's like some of them, some of it is like footage. All right, the format of the show is weird. It's like they're on stage, Adam Yauch and Michael Diamond, and they're at this venue called King's Theater, like I think it's Flatbush out in Brooklyn. Coincidentally, the same place that I saw Sigur Rós play, and I wrote like a live review of the show for the defunct Clairvoyant website.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
The funny thing about that night was that I've never seen so many white people together in one place as I did at that show. Like, and the crowd, they scanned the crowd at the Beastie Boys event at the same venue. And I thought, this is the same kind of thing, man. There's like just, mad, just like white people at this show, it's just really funny, And I don't know, I bring that up because they always talk about how like metal is like this kind of, not a very diverse genre of music.
Yeah.
But I think that I've gone to metal shows and there's been all sorts of people at all the shows. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. Totally. And, yeah, it's funny. I went to see the Beastie Boys live once many years ago when I lived in Boston. And I remember having that same experience. I was like, there's so many white people here.
Yeah. I mean, I got nothing against white people. I got nothing against anybody, but I just making an observation,
Yeah.
But so anyway, Mike D and Ad Rock are on stage talking. It's like rehearsed, and they're basically reading off a teleprompter, and then there's like these cues that would come up behind them on the screen. And I didn't really care for it. I wasn't that into it. And I've never been the biggest Beastie Boys fan. I liked them up to a point, but they were not like, they never really like grabbed me. Like they weren't like my thing, ever. Yeah. But I appreciate them. But just getting back to it, the topic is that Paul's Boutique, I think, is their best album, and no one else likes it. And similar. I don't think it's that extreme, but Fair Warning was definitely the sleeper out of the Van Halen catalog.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we did a pretty good job on this one, man.
Yeah, it was good. I felt like it went. And now that I'm kind of more comfortable doing these, I feel like that was. For me, I feel like it went smoother. I felt a little. I kind of felt like I was tripping over myself a lot when we did the Van Halen one, but this felt better. Yeah,
no, totally. Any parting words on this record before we kick this one in the ass, Jay?
No, man. I mean, I think it's I really love it, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to kind of dive deep on it, and especially like going down the rabbit hole with like I did with William Kurelic was really it was enlightening, and I wish the only thing I wish the two facts that remain that I don't know the answers to still after we've done all this that I would like to know is, where did Alex Van Halen see the painting, and why is Dirty Movies in quotes?
We might never know the answer to those questions.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. If you haven't heard Fair Warning by Van Halen, go out and listen to that record and you won't be disappointed.
Yeah. Amen.
That's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Gimme Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android. For one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week.